Sports cards used to be a huge part of sports culture. From baseball to basketball to football, these cards were huge for nostalgia for older collectors and younger kids. I remember as a kid getting football cards and it was one of the coolest things, and many people love to expand their collection to high profile players, rare versions of cards, or some from the most unique companies. Sports cards have had a crazy effect on people over the years, but it seems like over time, sports cards are no longer as popular. Nobody really talks about them anymore, people don't really have them, and I just don't really hear about them anymore. In today's video, we're going to do a very unique video on the channel and talk about the history, rise, and fall, and potential return of sports trading cards. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the unique history of sports trading cards. Trading cards existed before sports cards ever did, but the first sports card to be produced was from a company called W&D and H&O Willis in 1896. W&D and H.O. Willis was a British tobacco company, and they held a special interest in the sport of cricket in England. Realizing that a lot of their customer base bought tobacco from them and other companies, they needed an idea that would help keep customers coming back to them instead of other companies. They decided that producing cards with the likeness of local cricket players, that this in turn would make local purchasers be more likely to support Willis Tobacco, since it seemed like they were one of them and loved the same clubs that they did. Not long after that, also in 1896, another British company called Marcus & Company picked up on the idea and spread it to growing the sport of British football. It was called Footballers and Club Colours. It wasn't selling anything other than the players and the clubs themselves, and there was no tobacco or anything, just the cards. Soccer cards like these continued to explode in popularity across Britain during the early part of the 1900s. Sports cards weren't really a huge thing in the United States until baseball took off as a professional sport. Known mostly as cigarette cards, since they were also sold in packages of cigarettes, the primary purpose of these cards was similar to that of W.D. and H.O. Willis cards back in the mid-1890s, to get people to buy more. The other purpose of selling cards alongside cigarettes was more blunt. The cards themselves acted as an extra layer of protection for keeping the product safe from the elements of outside of the packaging. That's how a lot of older cards ended up smudged or stained with tobacco. But as baseball as a sport got more popular in the early 1900s, so did the cards. The famous T206 series of baseball cards in 1909, spread by the American Tobacco Company, would later become Topps trading cards. This was the catalyst for baseball cards to go even more mainstream, as they are considered the highest quality of cards that have ever been up to at that point, and featured the largest number of players in circulation at over 500. Each card featured a painted design of a baseball player on the front, featuring their last name and ball club. A few players like Ty Cobb and Honus Wagner had multiple cards for them. Some players got multiple cards as they were traded or signed to different teams, especially since the series lasted a few years. They were quickly revered as some of the more valuable collector's items in American history, with the Honus Wagner card being the most valuable trading card in existence since he personally didn't want any of them being printed. The 1930s brought another boom as the Goudey Gum Company set. They were similar to American Tobacco's company cards, but their most famous set was the 1933 Big League Chewing Gum set. Later, brands and cards would innovate by having the back of the card share things like yearly stats of players, biographies, and physical stats. The 1940s brought trading cards into the mainstream, led primarily by three companies: the Leaf Candy Company, the Bowman Gum Company, and the Topps Gum Company. Cards shifted their desired audience significantly from being shipped with tobacco to being shipped with kid-focused bubblegum. The distribution of cards hit their highest due to their large increased market, and cards were sold in pretty much every corner store in the country. They were so popular that nearly every kid in America had at least one. Baseball cards still ran the market, but in the 1940s, Bowman and Leaf brought a new fold into the mix with football and basketball cards. Cards featuring football players had been sold as early as 1888, with Yale's Henry Beecher being featured on a few circulated cards, and the Ivy League in general had a few sets get released that featured football players in the 1890s. Basketball hadn't quite yet reached its popularity within the American sports scene, but the addition of cards featuring their players helped it, since having cards with football and baseball players made it appear as if the sport was on equal footing with those two. But before we could talk about anything more with the history of cards, I want to talk about the future of football cards that has most recently gotten into the mainstream, and that is the sponsor of today's video, Onnit Athlete. So a couple of weeks ago, Onnit Athlete actually reached out to me about doing a sponsorship with the channel. They have some of the coolest trading cards on the market right now, and they are doing a heck of a job with football. For example, they sent me a couple of my favorite teams, as I got packs from Mizzou, Tennessee, Iowa State, Ohio State, and Florida, and they have almost every major college football team for pretty much any college football fan. The cards look awesome, they feel great, and they even have that awesome out-of-package smell. To me, it's definitely worth getting a couple packs of these, as I now have a great way of remembering the 2024 college football season, and I think you guys should go check them out as well. I'm going to leave a link in both the description and the comment section, as you can go over to Onnit Athlete and get your cards for your favorite team. And instead of wasting money on 2 cups of coffee this month, go over to Onnit Athlete and get a pack of your favorite cards for your favorite team and support your players. Thank you to Onnit Athlete for sponsoring today's video. But in 1948, both Bowman and Leaf released cards of players from the National Football League. After a few years of being black and white due to resource distribution in the war effort, these cards were now set to be produced in color. Aside from famous professional players, occasionally cards were made of college players, sometimes long after they played in college. This would feature the same painted or printed art style that had been common for sports cards in the years before their release, and they became super popular. Football cards steadily grew in popularity throughout the 50s and 60s as the process for making them became more streamlined, with more cards being printed or utilizing photographs in their design as opposed to being painted stencils. It was also during this era that cards started to stray away from the typical portrait and towards more of the action-oriented style that was famous earlier in trading cards histories back when they came from tobacco packs. Bowman as a competitor would eventually be bought out by Topps in 1956, culminating in Topps quickly becoming the country's leader in selling baseball cards. Joe Namath alone almost single-handedly reset the market on football cards with his famous called shot in Super Bowl III in 1969, leading to quickly becoming one of the most sought-after athlete cards in the country. He was a cocky quarterback who backed it up, making him one of the most popular players to younger teenage boys in the 60s, who were the primary market for trading cards at the time. His rookie year card, in turn, became one of the most valuable trading cards in existence. But since the desired consumer base was often younger kids, and so many kids were being sold alongside bubblegum and other candy, the quality of the cards that did survive this era were very low. It's not uncommon to open up your dad's old shoebox from when he was a kid and see a few baseball or football cards that he forgot about. Kids just accumulated them as they went about life, whether they necessarily wanted to collect them or not. As basketball cards started to get more popular throughout the 70s and 80s, baseball cards and football cards also continued to grow. Players like Larry Bird and Michael Jordan started to spearhead the concept of good sports players creating brands for themselves, which quickly bled over into cards. Players with high brands for themselves meant that cards needed to react to make cards that were more valuable for their consumers, bleeding over into the cards of switching purposeful rarities. The concept of rare cards also lended itself well to card companies, as they would innovate creating specific versions or special editions of cards and players, specifically rookie versions. All-star cards made for a player after they beat an established record, and retirement cards also became a special edition as well. Other brands that weren't necessarily known for making trading cards also started to dip their toes into the business as well. Kellogg's, for example, started their own trading card set in the 70s, and that lasted throughout the early 80s. Sports cards in general started to get produced in larger quantities than they ever had, oftentimes with newer and more unique designs to try and push the industry even further, and pushing internationally to find new markets for sports to compensate for an oversaturated market. This era was known as the junk wax era. Companies pushed to focus directly on creating cards instead of packaging them with other things like gum or comic books, but sometimes the quality of the cards were lower. Australian football cards especially started to take off in the 80s. In the States, collecting even started to become more of a valuable hobby, considering collectors started to realize the value of high-quality cards kept in good condition. On top of that, the collecting industry as a whole started to increase as the people who had started to get interested in sports cards got older and started getting more disposable income, meaning they could spend extra money on cards they wanted when they were kids but could not get at the time. Secondary industries like resellers and hobby shops specializing in buying in cards also started to earn a foothold in the industry, and by the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, that was mainstream. In response, card companies started to make more cards with more efficient practices, meaning they got more bang for their buck, and the concept of collecting got even more official. 1991 saw the introduction of Upper Deck making sports cards. One of Upper Deck's practices that quickly made them a focal point for collectors was their occasional autographs. They put some of those in card stacks, most notably with Reggie Jackson's autograph. This created a market for certified autograph inserts, or cards that had legitimately autographed sections on them that made them even more valuable, complete with the printed statements confirming their legitimacy. This was cut from things like postcards, paper, or other documents, and was pasted on the card to keep their legitimacy. This later turned into autograph stickers being placed on the card without the player even seeing what card was being used, but the concept of real things associated with a player. But this would continue on, as maybe they'd use a player's jersey from a game, and these were called chase cards. The rarest of these were called tag cards, which eventually featured an official logo from a player's jersey, like the team or league, since there are only one of those logos per jersey, meaning those cards are technically one of one. But by the end of the 90s, interest in sports cards had declined significantly amongst younger kids who would have been the newest generation of card collectors. To grow with their consumers, cards had to increase their use of autographs, special edition cards, and every other form of chase card to keep the market moving forward. More special edition cards were made than ever before, and companies started working with authentication services to ensure that every card they were making was confirmed and that potential extra editions were legitimate. As the internet grew, so did trading cards. QR codes and interactivity chips started to get involved with the sports cards business, as did the online presence for card manufacturers and sellers. An Italian group known as Panini branched out with Panini America, who took over duties as the official sports card manufacturer for a few leagues, including the NFL and NBA. Online marketplaces began to take the place of corner stores as the primary place that collectors found trading cards. Since then, people were looking for specific cards instead of finding them in packs found at the department stores or at a local gas station. Once the 2010s came around, basketball cards became the most sought after cards instead of baseball ones, and we saw the rapid decline of sports cards in general. But there is a future here. With the new age of college sports, also brought the opportunity for more college athletes to be featured in sports cards due to the new era of name, image, and likeness. Card producers have now started to take advantage of NIL, and that's where the sponsor of today's video, Onnit Athlete, came in, so be sure to check out and buy some of their cards if you want to be a part of the future of the sports trading card world. I think Onnit will continue to grow and will become the top college football card maker, and you should get in on them before they get mainstream. But I appreciate you guys checking out today's video, and what do you guys think? Why do you think that sports cards ended up having such a rapid decline? What are your personal opinion on them, and what other obscure topics should I cover next on the channel? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you can support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.